to a future we will never see. So he wanted to be sure that future was going to be better for them and that they would bring with them our values. In that regard, in terms of a better future, I'm so proud that this morning Richie Neal announced in the markup and the hearing that they were having on H.R. 3, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, that he was suggesting to name the bill for Elijah Cummings. So appropriate, because Elijah was a fighter for lowering the cost of prescription drugs, reaching across the aisle to do so. He always strove to reach across the aisle and treat all of our colleagues with respect, and even had dialogue with the president for a while on this subject. So it would be very appropriate that H.R. 3 would now be the Elijah Cummings low drug costs now legislation, whatever the formal title will be. It's very sad for all of us. We've all lost a friend. I'm devastated by the loss. Conveyed our condolences of our caucus to Maya, his dear wife, this morning, and she said what we all knew. He just fought to the end. But that's the way he was, not only on his personal health, but what he believed in the Congress of the United States. So we're back now after our district work period. We're members all over the country. We're part of a drumbeat for H.R. 3. For our For the People agenda, our first, number one, was to lower the cost of prescription drugs. They presented H.R. 3, heard feedback, and we are benefiting it with two markups this week, one in energy and commerce, the other in education and labor. The hearing in Ways and Means this week, and then the markup next week. And then we'll be well on our way to reconciling different versions and bringing something to the I think it's really important to note that since the break, toward the end of the break, we did get this Congressional Budget Office, the CBO score of $345 billion in savings just in the Medicare Part D part of the bill. Other savings, $158 billion in savings for family households, $46 billion in rebates and the rest. So the savings are considerable, and the Congress will decide how they will be. Some of it will be reinvested into innovation at the National Institutes of Health, perhaps in community health centers across the country, and expanded benefits for Medicare, visual, hearing, dental. Perhaps that's up to the committees. We'll hear back from them, and just trying to lower the cost to the community. Bobby Scott's committee is marking up this bill, but as many of you know, earlier in the week we announced his College Affordability Act, and we're very proud of the response from the members on that, and that will be making college less expensive. We're still at work on the U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement and making progress every day on our path to yes, but we're not there yet. As soon as we can get the assurances from the administration and from everyone involved that there will be enforceability of some of the provisions of the legislation, that it will really be an improvement on the current NAFTA, then we'll be able to proceed. But I'm optimistic about that. I'm still hoping that, and this came up across, although we were focused on For the People agenda, lower health care costs, build bigger paychecks by building the infrastructure of America, cleaner government. That was our agenda in the campaign. One of our priorities in this session has been to reduce the risk of gun violence in our country. It's now been 232 days since we sent our bipartisan legislation to the Senate. Every day, about 100 people die from gun violence, nearly half of them children up to the age of teenagers. My colleague, Frederica Wilson, when I was in Florida during the break, gave me this bracelet made from a bullet and the orange color of gun violence prevention. So we're not going away until we get legislation passed to reduce gun violence in our country. As you know, this has been a week of some issues that relate to our foreign engagement. I was very proud of the work on the floor of Congress to associate ourselves with the democratic aspirations of the young people of Hong Kong. I've been working with now 3 generations of Hong Kong democratic leaders just for the Chinese regime to obey the basic law under which Hong Kong was to exist, one country, 2 systems, living under the basic law, which made certain guarantees that are not being lived up to. But Congress came through this week, spoke very clearly in a bipartisan way about our support for that. Now we are eager that we have bipartisan support in the Senate, too, so hopefully that will come up soon there. As you know, yesterday on the floor, 354 members voted in a bipartisan way to oppose the president's dangerous decision in regard to Syria. By 2-1, Republicans voted to oppose the president's actions. There were only 60 votes in favor of the legislation. The legislation would have called for Turkey to use restraint, for us to help our friends, to be a trustworthy ally to Kurds, especially in humanitarian needs now that they're being bombed by the Turks or being attacked by the Turks. It also calls for the president to show a clear plan for how Americans will be protected from ISIS, which has been further unleashed. Green light to the Turks, actions taken that are renege on our handshake with the Kurds, and now we need to have a plan to deal with what happens with ISIS. As you know, that was the subject of conversation yesterday at the White House. I also pointed out to the president I had concerns that the L road seemed to lead to Putin. The Russians have been trying to get a foothold in the Middle East for a very long time unsuccessfully, and now the president has given them an opportunity with the Kurds reaching out to them for support in Syria. They have the Russians were the beneficiaries of any withholding of assistance or encouragement to the Ukraine. Again, Putin benefits. The Russians benefited, Putin did. The president placed some doubt about our commitment to NATO right from the start of his administration. All roads lead to Putin. Then the president said, well, the reason I'm taking the troops out of Syria is because I promised in the campaign to bring the troops home. My question to him was, is Saudi Arabia home? Is Saudi Arabia home? Why are our troops going to Saudi Arabia if you promised to bring them home? He said, well, the Saudi Arabians are paying for it. Really? We're putting our troops in harm's way for Saudi Arabia because they're paying? It just didn't add up. But what it did do was cause a meltdown on the part of the president because he was unhappy with those questions. And it was unfortunate because we really we were invited to the meeting. The president started off the meeting by saying, I don't know who asked for this meeting. I didn't. And we're like, well, let's proceed anyway. And we had hoped that our real mission was to find out what the plan was. Leader Schumer was very forceful in that discussion with the president on what is the plan. My plan is to protect America, so that's a goal. That's not a plan. What is the plan for us to be protected from ISIS now that some of them have been unleashed in Syria because of the green light that the president gave the Turks and reneging on our trustworthiness as an ally with the Kurds who had been our friends. So for these and other reasons, that was most unfortunate. On a separate front of all of that, I'm very proud of the work of Chairman Adam Schiff. Again, this is so solemn. None of us came to Congress to impeach a president. That's not what we come here to do. And any such actions are to be taken very solemnly, seriously, in my view, prayerfully. It isn't a unifying thing for the country to have to go through this, but we do have to honor our oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, our democracy, and our republic, as Benjamin Franklin said, a republic, if we can keep it. Well, it is our fight to keep it. As I've said to you before, the times have found us to do just that. So I'm very proud of the work that Adam Schiff is doing, and this isn't about politics or partisanship. It's about patriotism for our country, and I value the way he is conducting this with equal time on all sides for the questioning that are there. You've heard from him. We were here together when he presented how he was proceeding. He also sent a letter to members yesterday, which is in the public domain. I call it to your attention in case you have some questions about the professionalism and the fairness with which these hearings are being held. Any questions?
Thank you. First of all, my condolences on Chairman
that's so
Cummings.
sad.
He was a remarkable man. On the impeachment inquiry, how important is it to you not to let this bleed over into an election year?
Well, I think I've really made. Thanks, Nancy, for the question, and thank you for your condolences, Elijah. I keep saying to people, impeachment is about the truth and the Constitution of the United States. Any other issues that you have disapproving of the way the president has dealt with Syria, whatever the subject is, reluctance, the cowardice to do something about gun violence, the cruelty of not wanting to help our dreamers and transgendered people, the denial about climate crisis that we face. The list goes on. That's about the election. That has nothing to do with what is happening in terms of our honoring our oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution and the facts that might support. And we don't know where this path will take us, but could take us down a further path. But these two are completely separate.
But at what point would you just say, let's let the voters decide?
Who said that?
No, I'm saying, at what point might you say, let's just let the voters decide?
The voters are not going to decide whether we honor our oath of office. They already decided that in the last election. Yes, ma'am.
Republican leader Mitch McConnell seems to think that an impeachment trial in the Senate could wrap up before the end of the year.
I have no idea.
Does that seem unrealistic to you?
I have no idea. The path, the timeline will depend on the truth line, and that's what we're looking for. Chad?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On the Syria policy, and this is sort of a two-part question. Number one, do you think that we've gotten into this question about what should be the right policy in Syria, because there has not been an AUMF since 2001 and 2002. And the second part, and this dovetails a little bit with what Nancy was asking, would there be a scenario where, because you said yesterday it was dangerous what the president had done in regard to Syria, that this could bleed over into the impeachment issue because it's such a grave problem?
No. Let me answer your second question first. When I became Speaker the first time, no, maybe not, but there were those who were here who, who knew that hundreds of thousands of people were in the street asking me to impeach President Bush because of the war in Iraq and because of the misrepresentation that was made at the time as to why we should be going into Iraq. That's a policy matter that isn't, in my view, an impeachment matter. And I said if they had any case to make, they could make it, but I was not going down that path. Again, what could be worse than the war in Iraq and the misrepresentations that were made to the American people? And as you know, says I was the senior Democrat on intelligence. I had the Adam Schiff job, the one he had before becoming chairman in the majority. But in the minority, I was a member of the Gang of Four. I saw all the intelligence. I knew that there was no intelligence to support the threat that the administration was putting forth, and I said at the time the intelligence does not support the threat. Senator Graham of Florida was actually the chairman, because they had the majority at the time, the Democrats, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and he came to the same conclusion. We both voted no on the war. So I think that the war in Iraq was one of the worst mistakes in our country. I did not think it was about impeachment. It's about policy, and that's a different debate. Impeachment is about the law, not being above the law, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, about honoring our oath. Honoring our oath of office. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. On the USMCA, you just said a short time ago, you're making progress every day. Leader McConnell, however, has charged in recent days, as has the president, that Speaker Pelosi is still blocking the USMCA because Democrats' impeachment obsession is blocking urgent work for American families. So much of the work and negotiation here, Speaker Pelosi, kind of happening behind closed doors. Are there ways for Democrats to better convey the good faith progress to prevent the president and Republican leaders from charging that you are trying to block this.
Okay. Anybody else want to put all the Republican talking points on the table, because we could just get rid of them all at once?
Well, I'm not-
Yeah. Let me just respond to the second. Let me respond to your question rather than their misrepresentations, okay? First and foremost, it might be interesting to you, but a negotiation of this nature, and the administration would support this, not only support it, it's what they want. These negotiations are not in the public domain. The exchange of proposals and this or that is, I can't even share them with the members. In fact, I have a hard time getting some of it myself from time to time, and I do. It has Pelosi written across it, so if should it go astray, or I try to copy it to show anybody, that wouldn't happen. So these are confidential backs and forth, and I can honestly say that I think every day we are becoming closer. They were meeting yesterday with the trade representative, with some of our task force. I think they're going to meet again later today, perhaps at one more time. And then we should just see the issue is, do we have enforcement? So the people who are saying that don't know what they're talking about, or have a different agenda that they want to present. But we feel very good about being on a path to yes. We're not there yet because we don't have the enforceability assurance that we need to have. While we have some good things in the bill, it's only a list of good things unless it can be enforced.
Sure, and as far as you know, things like labor and environmental standards continue to be the Democrats.
But the three things, so the overarching is enforceability of the whole thing. And then the three concerns, as we have discussed before, are environment, the environmental concerns. And as a Californian, I can tell you firsthand that needs to be addressed. But all the border states could probably tell you that as well, vis-a-vis the southern border. The agreement has to be respectful of global agreements that are there on the environment. In other words, this is about what is realistic that we can get done. In terms of the prescription drug, that's a very big issue in our caucus, and we hope that we can resolve that. And then the third are the workers' rights and the rest. We don't see a situation where diminishing the prospects for workers in Mexico is any good for our hemisphere. So we want that to be very fair in that regard. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and again, condolences on Chairman Cummings. There was a picture yesterday that was taken at the White House with you standing up at the table speaking to the president. Can you tell us a little bit about that picture and what was being said at that time?
I think I was excusing myself from the room, but I think I told you what the thought that I conveyed to the president in the meeting about the 354-60 vote in the House disapproving of his Syria actions. A. B. My concerns about all roads leading to Putin. And if the president is saying, I said during the campaign I was going to take the troops home, then is home Saudi Arabia. That would be about the essence of either sitting down or standing up, what my conversation was with the president. But most important part of the meeting was, what is the plan? And that was part of my report on the legislation on the floor. What is the plan for fighting ISIS now that we have reneged on our handshake with the Kurds to do that fighting for us there? And that was strongly presented by Senator Schumer. So one or the other of those things is what was being said. I think it would be interesting, you tell me, if we could have a recording of what goes on in those offices, because they come out and say, this happened and that happened. And you're like, we must have been at two different meetings because that didn't happen. But nonetheless, then you get these kind of questions and the rest that have no fidelity to fact, but it's true that that's what they said. It is true that that's what they said. So I don't know what at that moment I was probably saying all roads lead to Putin. Yes, ma'am. Last question.
Speaker, as you pointed out, Chairman Schiff sent out the letter yesterday describing the process that he's going through in his committee right now, saying there could be public testimony ahead.
That's right.
I'm curious, how will you determine and when the future rules for this process, including whether the president will be allowed to have counsel or representation down the road as part of impeachment.
Well, you know what? This is a matter for the committee, and the rules are. We have rules of the House that govern all of this. But I think it's really important to reiterate the following. The process that the House is going through right now would be the equivalent of a special counsel in case of whatever the name was at the time for the Clinton or Jaworski and Sirica, way back when, before you were all born, on the Nixon. So they had prosecutors who were doing the investigation, and they were not doing that in the public domain. And so this is the part where we gather evidence. And as I've said to the president over and over, if you have I said this to him on the phone the day that we made our announcement about proceeding with the inquiry, that we've asked for your taxes. If you have nothing to hide, show us your taxes. We've asked for Mazer, your accounting. If you have nothing to hide, show us that. We've asked for this, that, and the other thing. If you have nothing to hide, we're giving you opportunity to show that you have nothing to hide. But what you're doing is just going further up into the courts. And last Friday, we had 5 court decisions in our favor, another one this week. So in terms of the law, this is about the Congress, the courts, and the Constitution. And in terms of the Congress, our responsibility is to fairly get the information according to the rules. And Mr. Schiff is running that show for us now. Thank you all very much. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, first comments since that meeting between the House Speaker and other lawmakers at the White House yesterday, which was completely derailed by the interaction between the House Speaker and President Trump. The Speaker essentially saying that she does believe that the president was melting down, and that you've heard from Republicans as well who were in the meeting who say no, this is it's the opposite of what happened. But we're going to talk to our Nancy Cordes, who's getting wired up to take us through this at one point. We're looking at a live picture of Capitol Hill right now, where you can see the flags are at half staff, obviously for the passing of Congressman Elijah Cummings, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, who passed away early this morning. And certainly you heard, as Nancy Cordes was speaking to Nancy Pelosi, she offered her condolences. Nancy is joining us now to talk about this. So Nancy, lots to break down here, including that meeting between the House Speaker and President Trump yesterday, where there were accusations being hurled from President Trump. Nancy Pelosi even indicating here, confirming that she did at one point tell the President of the United States that all roads lead to Putin. So break down what the Speaker has confirmed as to what happened yesterday.
Well, basically, she says that she has a very different story. She and her fellow Democrats have a very different story about what went down in that meeting than the White House does. According to her, she asked the president, and her counterpart in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, asked the president, what is your plan now? Now that you have taken these actions in Syria, you've withdrawn U.S. troops, Syria has descended into chaos, the Kurds are being attacked by the Turks. What do you plan to do? And he said that, according to Nancy Pelosi, the president said, well, he plans to protect the U.S. troops. And at which point she and Leader Schumer said, well, that is a goal. That's not a plan. What is the plan? And she argues that the president was not able to articulate what his plan was in the Middle East. Beyond that, she said she challenged the president. If he says that he is interested in pulling all the troops out of the Middle East, why is he sending troops to Saudi Arabia? To which the president responded, well, Saudi Arabia is paying for it. And she appeared to challenge him on that front as well. So she was asked what exactly she was saying to the president in that now infamous moment, that photo where you see her basically standing up as everyone, including the president, sits down and sort of shaking her finger finger at him, and she said that may have been the moment at which she told him that she was going to leave. But she's not quite sure. Regardless, it sounds like it was a pretty heated meeting and, frankly, par for the course between Speaker Pelosi and the president these days. Many of their meetings appear to end this way.
Yeah, and it's not even clear who wanted the meeting. The president saying that he was asked to take this meeting. Nancy Pelosi saying...
So sorry, I appear to have lost... Vlad, I'm so sorry
it's
if you're
okay.
talking to me. I appear to have lost my audio feed.
No worries, Nancy. If you can't hear us, we will, let's figure out if we can get that audio fixed for Nancy. And what I will explain to our viewers is that at the end of that meeting, as Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer made their way to talk to reporters. At one point, Senator Schumer said that he tried to appeal to President Trump's sense of being a New Yorker, having lived through the 9/11 attacks with regards to an organization like ISIS, the problems that will arise if ISIS is allowed to fester and grow. And he mentioned the name of General Mattis, who, of course, Marine Corps general, four-star general, former defense secretary, Schumer said that Mattis was worried about that, and that was when, according to reporters, according to Democrats who were in the meeting, the president said that General Mattis was overrated as a general. He called General Mattis the world's most overrated general. You know why? He wasn't tough enough. I captured ISIS. Mattis said it would take 2 years. I captured them in a month. That is according to Democratic sources and Senator Schumer, who spoke to reporters after. So I think we have Nancy's audio back up. So, Nancy, I was trying to sort of give more insight into the bits that have been reported out from various reporters and you yourself as well, to what Senator Schumer told some reporters about that comment that the president made about General Mattis. And there were many other things, including whether I don't know if it was third-rate politician or third-grade politician,
Right.
But that was the moment where I guess Nancy Pelosi decided she had had enough.
Right. And so you're right that according to Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi, the president called her a third-grade politician. There's a bit of a dispute. The White House says third-rate. And also Democrats say that the president argued that General Mattis was vastly overrated, which certainly sounds like the kind of language that we're used to from this president. But nevertheless, Speaker Pelosi, in a lighter moment here in the briefing, said perhaps there should be an audio recording of these meetings so that we could actually see the transcript, since there's always a dispute afterwards about who was rude to whom and whose fault it is that the meeting broke up after being so unproductive in the first place. She claims that when they walked into the meeting, the president said, well, I don't know who called this meeting because I didn't ask for it. So according to Democrats, the meeting got off to a bad start and then went downhill from there.
Nancy, one more question on this before we talk about Elijah Cummings. There was a question to Speaker Pelosi about the timeline, and it's not clear to me. Perhaps you can sort of provide some clarity for our viewers. Every day there seems to be something else that comes out, especially with these closed-door testimonies. And so as Congress continues to gather up information, evidence, they are still kind of looking at a calendar. And at one point it becomes, I guess, a question of how much evidence do they need before they decide to hold this vote? Or do they continue gathering as much information as they can to be able to present that to the American people to buttress sort of their argument as to why this impeachment vote needs to happen? But are they even looking or thinking about a calendar?
They absolutely are looking at the calendar, because many Democrats tell us, Vlad, that they would really like to try to get this off their plate before we head into 2020 for a number of reasons. First of all, obviously 2020 is an election year. Voters will start going to the polls in primaries and caucuses at the very start of the year. And some Democrats have made the point, once we get into 2020, let's just let the voters decide. Why would we be the ones to try to remove the president from office at that point? Nancy Pelosi, you heard her dispute that argument today when I asked her about it. She said, we have a duty to fulfill our oath of office no matter what time it happens. But beyond that, Democrats also worry that the longer that this drags on, the more it looks like they're only focused on one thing and one thing only, and that is impeachment. And when they're going back home and going to their voters, because the entire House has to get reelected every 2 years, they'd like to have more to show for it than just an impeachment proceeding that has really, that sucked up all the oxygen for months and months. And so, yes, they want to do as many of these depositions as possible. That's why you see them scheduled at a rate of 1 per day at this point. They're trying to get as many of them done as quickly as possible, then hold some public hearings, perhaps bring some of the individuals who came in for depositions back for a couple of blockbuster public hearings. And then, there are many Democrats who say that by November, they would like to be writing up articles of impeachment potentially and holding a vote first in the Judiciary Committee and then on the full House floor so that they can pass them along to the Senate, where it then goes through the process of a Senate trial and a vote in the Senate where it would require a 2/3 majority to remove the president from office.
And Nancy, before you go, obviously, all of Washington and all of America essentially is mourning the loss of Congressman Elijah Cummings of Baltimore. And I know, obviously, you passed on your condolences to the Speaker, and we've been speaking to some lawmakers as well. I just want to share with our viewers that the ranking member of the House Oversight and Reform Committee, Jim Jordan, he put out this statement saying, "We are deeply saddened by the passing of Elijah Cummings, a man of great consequence and significance on the Oversight Committee. Our thoughts are with his staff, who are among the hardest working people on Capitol Hill. Their loyalty and affinity for him speaks volumes about his character." Really beautiful and moving sentiment there from ranking member Jim Jordan. What was your experience, Nancy, covering the Hill for so many years and seeing how Elijah Cummings, his beautiful oratory and the way that he interacted with both members of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party?
Well, Vlad, Elijah Cummings was really sort of a unique character here on Capitol Hill. The fact that you are seeing not just perfunctory condolences rolling in from Republicans, but really very moving condolences from Republicans and Democrats alike tells you how respected he was here on Capitol Hill, which is all the more unusual because he was a fierce partisan fighter when he wanted to be. He was the one that Democrats would turn to for sort of the closing argument on big pieces of legislation time and time again, because he did have this incredible ability to sum up the moral argument and make the case on the House floor. And as you mentioned, he had that booming baritone voice. He had it from the day that he got here to Capitol Hill in the 90s and rose quite quickly up the ranks because of it. You had Jason Chaffetz, who was the former chair of the House Oversight Committee, call him an extraordinary man. And he was. He could be very gruff. He could be very kind. Reporters loved to interview him because he was quite frank and he respected the work that we did. And he was one of those lawmakers who you felt you had gotten to know on a personal level, not just a professional level. And so he is going to be deeply missed, not just by the journalists who cover Capitol Hill, but the lawmakers and the aides who admired him. And it was really interesting to watch Vlad over the last I'd say 6 months of his life. He was always someone who was viewed as a role model and a mentor to newer members of Congress, but he really spoke out in particular for those new House freshmen who had caught the president's eye and so often were attacked by the president on Twitter, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the like. And he teared up defending them, saying how much he admired them, how hardworking they were, how much there was to learn from the example they set. So, he was talking more and more about his own mortality, looking back at the past, and clearly showing that he saw that he was going to be passing the baton, if you will, fairly soon. So he was someone who took newer members under his wing and set an example, and there aren't that many like him here on Capitol Hill to be missed.
Really, really moving words there from you, Nancy, as well, on this icon, this lion of the Congress. We really appreciate it. We should point out to our viewers that the flags around the Capitol and in Washington are flying at half staff. There you can see the flags over the Capitol Dome or near the Capitol Dome. Nancy Cordes, thank you as always, Nancy. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Let's take a quick break, but we also want to remind you that we're expecting to hear from Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo very soon. They are in Turkey, meeting with the country's president, Erdogan, following his invasion of Syria and his attack on our Kurdish allies. The Vice President and the Secretary of State are asking for a ceasefire, although President Trump insists we still have no stake in the matter. We will bring that to you when we get it. But for now, quick break. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on. Today, lawmakers on Capitol Hill are hearing more closed-door testimony as part of the impeachment inquiry against President Trump. This comes as the president and other Republicans continue to push for a testimony from the whistleblower who sparked the investigation.
Meanwhile, the law firm representing the whistleblower argues their client's identity should be kept a secret to avoid losing focus on what the investigation is really about. CBS News special correspondent and co-host of Showtime's The Circus, Alex Wagner, spoke with an attorney at that law firm.
Find out about a whistleblower.
Since news broke about a whistleblower complaint deemed credible and urgent by the Inspector General of the intelligence community, President Trump has appeared to focus on unmasking his or her identity.
I think a whistleblower should be protected if the whistleblower's legitimate.
But among the layers of protection for whistleblowers, to a certain degree, is anonymity.
Is the whistleblower afforded federal protection if they are unmasked?
It's not quite clear what would necessarily be legally entitled with respect to this whistleblower.
Who gets to make that decision?
In theory, the president.
Bradley Moss is from the law firm Mark Zaid, which is representing the whistleblower at the root of the impeachment inquiry.
Is it a fool's errand to think that this person is going to stay anonymous?
If this person becomes the story, then the subject of all of this is not about whether or not the president's behavior, his conduct was wrong, impeachable.